I never thought a peaceful morning on my family's lakefront. Property would spiral into a months-long war with the most controlling woman I've ever met. But that's exactly what happened when HOA Karen decided she had more authority than the title deed in my name. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA board member who thinks rules don't apply to her, or if you've ever been falsely accused of trespassing on land you actually own, this story is going to hit home. Make sure you stick with me to the end, and don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories on YouTube, because this tale of ego, control, and backyard revenge is something no one saw coming. It all started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of day that makes living in a lakefront house feel like a dream. The sun was just beginning to warm the surface of the water. Birds chirped around the trees, and I had taken my kayak out for a short paddle before work. My property had been in my family for decades, long before the Rosefield Shores development ever sprang up on the north side of the lake. We weren't part of the HOA. Our house and a few others on the south shore were grandfathered, in totally independent of the association's jurisdiction. But that didn't stop Karen Mulgrave, the self-declared queen of the HOA board, from deciding she needed to police every inch of the lake as if it belonged to her. As I glided along the water near the invisible halfway point, I heard someone shouting from the North Shore dock. I looked up to see a woman with bleached blonde hair and a wide-brimmed hat waving her arms like she was directing traffic. Even from a distance, I could tell she was furious. I paddled a little closer, mostly to hear what she was yelling about. "This is HOA-managed property," she screamed. "You're not allowed to be on this lake unless you're a resident." I blinked in confusion, looked around, and then shouted back, "I live here. That's my dock over there south end." Karen was undeterred. "I don't care. This is a restricted-use lake for paying association members only. You're violating HOA access rules." I shook my head, laughed, and turned my kayak around. I didn't think it was worth arguing. I knew the law, and I knew my property rights. But that was my first mistake, thinking Karen would let it go. The next morning, there was a printed notice nailed to a tree near my dock. "Attention, unauthorized lake use observed. Subject to fines and removal." It was signed Rosefield Shores HOA Compliance Team. There was only one problem. They had no authority over my land or the portion of the lake attached to it. I pulled the notice down and drove to the HOA office to clear things up, figuring it was a misunderstanding. But when I walked into the main lobby and asked to speak to the president, the receptionist gave me a nervous glance and whispered, "Oh, you mean Karen? She's in a mood today." Still, I waited. After 10 minutes, Karen came stomping down the hallway in heels that clicked like gunshots. "You," she said, pointing. "You're the man trespassing in HOA water." I replied calmly, "Ma'am, I live on the lake. My land predates this development, and my family has deeded lake access. You don't have any jurisdiction over my shoreline." Karen rolled her eyes. "We have updated rules to maintain the lake. That means shared responsibility and access limitations." I asked to see those rules. She handed me a freshly printed document dated just last week, clearly a new regulation, rushed into existence after our encounter. "This isn't legal," I said, handing it back. "You can't pass rules that affect non-member properties." She glared at me like I'd just insulted her bloodline. "We'll see about that," she said, and stormed off. I thought that was the end of it, but within days I began receiving complaints. First, a city code inspector showed up at my door, claiming someone had filed a report about unlicensed boat storage on my property. Then the water utility company sent a letter saying they were notified of possible shoreline contamination. From my dock, I wasn't just annoyed, I was furious. Karen was trying to weaponize bureaucracy against me, creating paper trails to harass me off the lake. I decided it was time to fight back, but smartly. I contacted a property attorney and gave him everything: my title deed, the survey maps, the HOA's new lake use rule, and a list of dates when I was approached or harassed. My lawyer confirmed what I already knew. Karen had no legal standing, and she was flirting with serious liability for targeting private property under the guise of HOA enforcement. We sent her a cease and desist letter, formally demanding that she and the HOA cease all communication regarding my lake use. I thought the letter might finally shut things down, Instead, it poured gasoline on Karen's fire. That weekend, I invited some friends over, and we went out on my pontoon boat, anchoring about 30 feet from my dock with snacks, music, and fishing rods. It was peaceful, quiet until a loud motor whirred from the other side of the lake. Karen had commandeered the HOA patrol boat, usually reserved for lake cleanup, and was now steering it directly toward us. She had on a life vest and sunglasses, like she was the Coast Guard. I stood up and waved her off. "Go back, Karen. This is private water." But she kept coming until she was right beside us, barking that we were in restricted water and threatening to call the sheriff. I told her to go ahead. She did. Then 15 minutes, 2 deputies arrived at her dock. Her side. They came over to my boat, reviewed my property documentation, and then politely asked Karen to return the patrol boat and leave me alone. That might have been the best moment of the month, watching her face turn beet red as law enforcement told her she was wrong. Still, I had a gut feeling she wouldn't stop. Karen didn't just want to control the lake. She wanted to prove that she was the queen of it. And the next move she made would turn this lake war into something far bigger than anyone imagined. Make sure to keep watching, because what happens next involves secret board meetings, a drone, and a legal twist Karen never saw coming. After Karen's humiliating failure with the sheriff and her forced retreat from the lake in that ridiculous patrol boat, I figured maybe, just maybe, she would finally back off and accept that she had no claim over my private shoreline. I had underestimated just how deep her obsession ran. By the following Monday, neighbors on the North Shore, some who I'd been friendly with in the past, started giving me strange looks, cold nods, or avoiding eye contact altogether. It wasn't long before I found out why. Karen had sent out a community-wide HOA email titled "Trespasser Still Refuses to Leave Lake," complete with a photo of my pontoon boat taken from across the water, and a paragraph painting me as a non-compliant violator with a history of aggressive behavior. My name wasn't listed, but the picture made it crystal clear who she was talking about. I received 3 separate calls that day: one from a concerned parent whose kid used to fish off my dock, one from a neighbor asking if I really had a criminal record, and one from an elderly couple apologizing for being pressured by Karen to report any unauthorized activity on the lake. This woman wasn't just issuing made-up rules anymore. She was actively trying to turn the entire community against me. I called my attorney, who immediately issued a second cease and desist letter and warned the HOA that defamation was now part of the legal conversation. That should have ended it. But Karen wasn't finished. In fact, it seemed like she was just getting started. 3 days later, I was out on my kayak, again keeping close to the shoreline, well within my property boundaries, when I heard a strange buzzing noise overhead. I looked up to find a drone hovering directly above me, its camera fixed in my direction. It was a medium-sized quadcopter, white with blinking red lights. I assumed at first it was a hobbyist or maybe a curious kid, but then I paddled back toward my dock and watched as the drone followed, keeping just 20 feet behind me all the way. It lingered above my dock for a full minute, recording or watching, then slowly returned toward the north side of the lake, landing neatly on the upper balcony of Karen's house. That's when I knew she had escalated to aerial surveillance. I called the county sheriff's office and reported the incident, and they sent out an officer who politely told me that, unfortunately, drone laws were still limited when it came to non-commercial use over shared bodies of water. If she's using it to spy on private property, that could be harassment, the deputy said. But proving intent is tricky without audio or close-up footage. We'll document it, though. I took his advice and installed 2 security cameras on the trees flanking my dock, both with motion tracking and cloud backup. The very next morning, the drone returned, this time hovering lower. My camera caught it in full detail. We traced the drone's serial number through publicly available footage that Karen had accidentally posted on the Rosefield Shores HOA Facebook group, showing a short community lake patrol video with her voice narrating. I sent everything to my lawyer, who contacted a civil investigator. At this point, it had become clear. Karen was abusing her role as HOA president to create her own vigilante-style surveillance operation. The kicker came a week later, during an HOA board meeting. I decided to attend, just to see what lies she was telling in person. As I sat quietly in the back of the community center, Karen stood at the front of the room behind a podium, addressing the other board members and about 20 residents. She was presenting a slideshow titled Lake Activity Monitoring Plan, complete with bullet points on unapproved vessel registration, non-member fishing, and suspicious late-night boat movements. Each of these points, though vague, was obviously referencing me. Then she dropped the bombshell. As of next month, I propose we install motion-triggered floodlights and a wireless camera system facing the south end of the lake to monitor nightly disturbances. This will be funded by discretionary maintenance funds. I raised my hand and stood up. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you proposing that HOA money be used to install cameras facing property that the HOA doesn't even control?" Karen narrowed her eyes at me like I had interrupted a sacred ritual. "The lake is shared," she said smugly. "We have every right to monitor our section." "Not when your cameras point at my land," I replied. "That's illegal surveillance. You've already been warned twice." The room went silent. One of the board members, an older gentleman named Frank, who had remained neutral until now, cleared his throat. "Karen, I wasn't aware we had a legal right to monitor areas outside of our jurisdiction. Have we consulted legal counsel on this?" Karen waved him off. "We don't need legal counsel for community safety." But it was too late. Seeds of doubt had been planted. Several residents were clearly uncomfortable, whispering to each other as I walked out. Later that week, an anonymous board member forwarded me a copy of a draft contract between the HOA and a private security tech company. Karen had already initiated the process to install 2 pole-mounted cameras near the HOA boat launch, both with 360-degree range, one of which would inevitably sweep across my dock. That was it. I filed for a restraining order and prepared to sue the HOA for harassment, defamation, and illegal surveillance. My lawyer drafted the lawsuit and presented it to the county court, which issued a temporary injunction blocking the HOA from installing any equipment that monitored non-member property. Karen was furious. She stormed out of the next board meeting after the order was read aloud, muttering that the community was sliding into chaos and that trespassers were winning. But even with the court order, she didn't stop. A few nights later, I was woken at 2 a.m. by flashing blue lights reflecting on my bedroom ceiling. I ran outside to find 2 patrol cars parked at the foot of my driveway. An officer approached and asked if I had been out on the lake recently. "Not since yesterday morning," I said. He told me someone had called in a complaint about illegal night boating and suspected noise disturbances. I showed him the time-stamped video from my dock camera and nothing had moved for hours. The officer sighed and apologized. "It is the 3rd false report this month," he said. "And they're all coming from the same source." I didn't have to ask who. The situation had gone from nuisance to madness. But something unexpected was happening in the background. Several HOA members, fed up with Karen's antics, started speaking out. A new Facebook group popped up called Take Back Rosefield. It was full of residents sharing their own stories of being fined, warned, or harassed by Karen for the smallest violations. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. A growing number of people were asking questions and digging into how much power Karen really had. What they discovered would blow the lid off the entire operation and show the whole neighborhood that Karen had far more to hide than a drone and a clipboard. Asterisk. By the time the Take Back Rosefield Facebook group reached over 300 members, nearly half the community had begun questioning not just Karen's lake obsession, but the very legitimacy of her leadership. Stories flooded in from residents who had been slapped with mysterious HOA fines, denied community space bookings without explanation, or told their landscaping was in violation despite following published guidelines. The patterns were too consistent to ignore, and many of those affected were those who had either disagreed with Karen publicly or resisted her extra rules. But it was one specific post from a woman named Juditha, a retired accountant who lived 2 houses from the lake, that caused the biggest ripple. She shared a PDF containing the HOA's financial ledger, which she'd obtained through a formal request as a DOS paying member. In it were several miscellaneous operational expenses listed under vague descriptions like security upgrades, lake monitoring tools, and compliance consultations. Over $18,000 had been spent in just the last 9 months. Above average and with no itemized invoices attached. Judith added a simple caption: "Where is our money going? And why haven't we seen a vote on these expenses?" That one question kicked off a chain of events that even I couldn't have predicted. Within days, a group of residents submitted a motion to the HOA board demanding a special meeting for transparency and accountability. And although Karen initially tried to block it, calling it disruptive and unfounded, she had no legal authority to stop a properly petitioned member meeting under the HOA's own bylaws. The board was forced to comply. I watched the tension build from my side of the lake, quietly gathering all the paperwork I'd accumulated, the false complaints, the drone footage, the cease and desist letters, the court injunction, and every email exchange Karen initiated in which she pretended to enforce rules that didn't apply to me. My lawyer said if Karen had knowingly used HOA resources to target me personally, especially if those expenses were hidden in the budget, she could face legal action and be personally liable. The special meeting was held at the community clubhouse, and attendance was so high that residents spilled out onto the lawn. Karen walked in with her signature superiority linked by her 2 longtime allies on the board, Dale and Connie, but the mood had shifted. Gone were the nervous nods and deferential tones. Instead, people sat with arms crossed, eyebrows raised, and their phones ready to record. Angela, one of the newer board members, and someone who had started as a quiet observer, stood up and began the meeting. "This isn't an attack," she said. "This is about clarity. We're all neighbors. But questions need answers." Oh. Judith took the floor first, presenting a breakdown of the unexplained expenditures. Then another resident, Greg, a former HOA president from another state, pointed out the lack of competitive bidding for services like surveillance, tech installations, and lawn patrol. "Why are we paying a private drone consultant $3,000 a month when there's no board-approved contract?" he asked. Karen's face went pale. "Those services were part of a broader safety initiative," she replied quickly. "Approved under discretionary spending due to urgency?" "Urgency?" someone shouted from the back. "We don't have any crime here?" Then Angela asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Karen, did you purchase a drone using HOA funds?" Karen didn't answer. She reached for her folder but fumbled. Dale tried to interject, but the room erupted in a chorus of yes or no. Finally, Karen admitted. "Yes, but it was to monitor lake safety." That's when I stood up. It's a drone following me, filming me on my own shoreline that was paid for by these people's dues. A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. "You were in shared water space," Karen snapped. "You've been in violation of community usage policy since day one." "My property isn't part of your HOA," I said. "You've known that? You've been told that. You've used the community's money to harass me and others using made-up violations and unauthorized surveillance." The tension was thick enough to slice with a paddle. Greg stood up again. "We've consulted an attorney. Karen, you've overstepped your authority repeatedly, and several of your actions may constitute fiduciary misconduct. The board needs to vote tonight." Karen laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think you can just strip me of my authority because you're upset over a few safety measures?" "No," Angela said softly. "We're voting because you've abused the trust of this community." The board moved into a closed session for 10 minutes. When they returned, Angela read the decision out loud, effective immediately. Karen was removed as HOA president pending full financial audit and potential legal investigation. Her access to HOA systems was revoked, and a temporary chairperson, Angela, appointed by unanimous vote. The room broke into cautious applause. Karen stood frozen, red-faced, then stormed out of the clubhouse without a word. But the fallout was just beginning. That night, my motion sensor camera on the dock triggered. Around midnight, the drone was back, but this time, it was damaged, sputtering, and clearly out of control. It hovered for a moment, then dropped into the lake with a small splash. I retrieved it the next morning, soaked but mostly intact, and gave it to Marcus. A tech-savvy friend who lived nearby. He managed to recover part of the SD card, and what we found stunned us. The final video recorded showed Karen placing a new battery in the drone on her porch, talking to someone off camera. "We're going to get one last shot of him out there, then we'll file for criminal trespass. He won't know what hit him." The voice off-screen replied. "Are you sure the board won't find out?" Karen snapped. "They're too stupid to trace it. Just do it." With that footage, my attorney updated our case, submitting the drone's recovered video to the court. Along with a formal claim of targeted harassment, unlawful surveillance, and misappropriation of HOA funds, Karen's actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal. But while she was finally being held accountable, the community was left in disarray. Rumors swirled that she'd fled to a relative's house across the state. Supported her were now posting public apologies online. But the strangest part? The lake felt peaceful. For the first time in months, I sat on my dock one evening without looking over my shoulder. No drone, no patrol boat. No shouted threats. Just water, wind, and silence.
Ow.
But just as I began to breathe again, Marcus called.
Ow.
"There's more," he said. When I checked the drone's memory deeper, I found other folders, ones not labeled. She wasn't just filming you, she was watching everyone. And what she caught on video might just drag even more people into this mess. What Karen had done wasn't just about me. It was about Control End, a secret network of watchers that had gone unnoticed for far too long. What we were about to uncover next would shake Rosefield's shores to its core. Asterisk. The sun had barely risen when Marcus showed up at my door, laptop in one hand, a flash drive in the other, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "You need to see this," he said. I ushered him inside and he set his computer down on my dining room table, clicking open a folder labeled Only K Archives. Inside were dozens of drone videos, not just of my property, but of nearly every home around the lake, some taken during the day, others at night. There were clips of families barbecuing in their backyards, teenagers swimming off their docks, a woman sunbathing on her private deck, and even to couples arguing near their patio furniture, clearly unaware they were being recorded from above. "She's been spying on the entire lake," Marcus said. This wasn't about enforcement, it was surveillance, plain and simple. Each file had a timestamp, and Marcus had checked metadata. Many of the recordings were captured during hours Karen was supposed to be at HOA meetings or events, meaning she had been skipping duties just to sit at home and fly her drone around spying on people. One file stood out, a 15-minute video, where Karen's voice is clearly audible over the drone mic, talking to another woman, Connie, the board member who always voted with her. "That guy on lot 44 keeps letting his kids swim without life jackets," Karen said. "Mark him down. Make sure we send him a warning with a fake signature from the compliance officer. We'll backdate it to last month." My jaw clenched. This wasn't just overreach, it was fraud. "Do you think Connie was helping her run all this?" I asked. "No doubt," Marcus replied. "She's the one who signed half the expense forms Judith flagged. They were in this together." That same afternoon, I met with Angela and showed her everything. She sat in stunned silence as we played clip after clip. This is criminal," she whispered. "And it wasn't just you. It was all of us." Angela wasted no time. She called an emergency board meeting and looped in their legal counsel. Within 24 hours, a full internal investigation was launched. A forensic audit team was hired to review all HOA purchases made during Karen's term. And subpoenas were requested for HOA surveillance contracts, vendor invoices, and financial correspondence. But things took a stranger turn when Karen, still in hiding, made a move of her own. Using a third-party law firm, she sent a mass email to every resident in Rosefield Shores. In it, she claimed the footage had been misinterpreted, that her safety patrol program was always intended to protect vulnerable residents, and that her removal from the board was the result of a targeted campaign driven by angry non-members with personal vendettas. She framed herself as a whistleblower, even accusing the new board of covering up negligence. She included cherry-picked screenshots, selectively edited videos, and even a copy of a fake survey that she claimed proved the community supported her surveillance efforts. But this time, her tactics didn't work. Residents weren't buying it. In the days that followed, over 70 residents signed an open letter condemning Karen's actions and calling for a permanent ban against her holding any HOA position in the future. One resident even filed a separate police report, claiming she saw Karen flying the drone outside her bedroom window weeks earlier. Angela took the evidence to the county prosecutor. With mounting pressure and video proof, an investigation was launched not only into Karen, but into Connie and Dale as well, both of whom had financial signatures on the drone and tech purchases. The DA's office subpoenaed HOA bank records, drone flight logs, and even the footage Karen had sent to her own lawyers. The media caught wind of the story shortly after. A local investigative news team published a piece titled HOA Gone Rogue, Neighborhood President Accused of Mass Surveillance, complete with blurry drone images and Karen's mugshot from an older, unrelated city complaint. The story exploded. Online, Karen's name trended for 3 days. But the real storm hit when the HOA's insurance provider pulled their liability coverage pending the investigation, leaving the board exposed. That's when Connie panicked, in a closed-door session. She agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for immunity from civil prosecution. She admitted to forging compliance warnings, using HOA funds to buy the surveillance equipment, and helping Karen create fake violation records for multiple residents, including me. She handed over email chains, text messages, and even voice recordings from their private meetings. Connie's confession gave investigators the final piece of the puzzle. Karen had run a private surveillance operation using HOA money, falsified official warnings, intimidated residents, and tried to rewrite Lakeview's policies to exert control over non-member properties. What had started as an ego-driven grudge had become a full-fledged criminal conspiracy. With that, the DA filed formal charges against Karen: unauthorized surveillance, wire fraud, misuse of public funds, criminal harassment, and document falsification. She was arrested without incident at a cousin's home 3 towns away. A photo of her in handcuffs, wearing oversized sunglasses and looking completely defeated, was front-page news. Meanwhile, the HOA began rebuilding. Angela led a vote to dissolve the current board and implement new oversight structures, including mandatory community audits, term limits, and a permanent rule that no HOA policy could affect non-members without a 2/3 external property owner vote. My case was wrapped up as well. Karen's drone videos entered into evidence and Connie signed testimony. The court ruled in my favor on all counts. Karen was ordered to pay damages personally for legal fees, emotional distress, and defamation. She was also banned from entering Rosefield Shores or operating any drone within county limits for 5 years. The lake, once a battleground, finally returned to peace. I resumed kayaking without fear. Neighbors waved again, instead of whispering. And the HOA bulletin board began featuring things like BBQ invites and cleanup days rather than surveillance, warnings, and policy threats. But perhaps the most surprising moment came from an older man I'd never spoken to before, Mr. Blackwell. A quiet resident who had lived at the far end of the North Shore since before I was born. He walked up to me one morning while I was tending to my dock and said, "You know, I've lived here a long time, seen a lot of neighborhood squabbles. But nobody ever stood up to her like you did." Reminded us that just because someone's loud doesn't mean they're right. It meant a lot. Not just because it validated everything I'd fought through, but because it showed me how close the neighborhood had come to becoming something unrecognizable. Karen might have lost, but the scars she left behind taught Rosefield a critical lesson: power without accountability will always rot from the inside. Still, even as things returned to normal, Marcus and I couldn't help but feel that Karen's full story hadn't yet been told. There were references in her emails to a private cloud account, one that had been syncing drone footage nightly before the crash. And if what we found in the drone's memory was only part of the archive, then what else had she been watching? The final answers and one last explosive secret. Even after Karen's arrest, the lawsuits, the board resignations, and the news coverage that turned Rosefield Shores into a neighborhood cautionary tale, there was one final piece of the puzzle that refused to stay buried. Marcus had been quietly working on decrypting the private cloud folder referenced in Karen's drone control app. Metadata had been password protected, set to sync only when the drone was charging at Karen's home Wi-Fi. But her careless digital habits left traces and, eventually, Marcus cracked it. The contents weren't just backups of drone footage, they were something darker. Hundreds of images and videos, sometimes stamped over a year before our conflict began, had been organized into subfolders by address. Karen hadn't just been spying on residents recently, she had been systematically building files on over 30 homes around the lake for more than a year. Inside the folders were audio recordings of HOA meetings where she had secretly recorded other board members, private conversations between residents captured by Zoom mics from the drone, and even photographs of HOA-related documents that were meant to be confidential. There were spreadsheets tracking which neighbors had supported her policies and who had objected. With notations like watch list, likely dissenter, and needs fine, she had been building an enemy list and using it to control the community from behind the curtain. Marcus handed everything over to the investigators. 2 days later, a bombshell follow-up report aired on local news. HOA spy ring. President. Accused of targeting residents in widespread surveillance operation. It didn't just focus on Karen anymore, implicated Dale and Connie as knowing participants. It also revealed that Karen had attempted to run for local city council just 6 months earlier, with her campaign pitch centered around community safety and compliance. She had fully intended to scale her power beyond Rosefield. That revelation hit the neighborhood hard. More residents began filing independent complaints. At least a dozen separate civil suits were opened, and Rosefield Shores HOA was forced to dip into a reserve legal fund just to cover the fallout. The association nearly collapsed under the weight of it. Angela, in a group of new interim board members, worked around the clock to prevent total disbandment, revising rules, suspending controversial fines, offering public apologies to residents. As for me, I became something I never expected to be, a point of reference. Whenever new policy ideas came up, someone in the crowd would always say, "Let's not have another Karen situation," and heads would nod. I started getting invited to speak at HOA reform panels in nearby communities, even consulted on a podcast series about abuse of power in gated neighborhoods. It was surreal. And yet, even with the victory secured, something inside me hadn't settled. I got wondering how Karen had gotten so far unchecked. It wasn't just about rules or power, it was about silence. Too many people had seen the red flags and said nothing. Some feared retribution, others just didn't want to get involved. That's how people like Karen thrive, not with force, but with fear. Weeks passed. One night, while I was out on the lake in my kayak under a silver full moon, I paddled to the middle and just sat there, letting the water hold me. The lake, the place that had once brought me joy, but later became a battlefield, finally felt like mine again. Peaceful, still, free. But just as I closed my eyes, I noticed something strange, a flicker of red light on the far side, near the woods. Turned. It blinked once, then vanished. I paddled toward it, cautious, until I reached the shore near Lot 52, where Karen's old ally Dale used to live. The house had been dark and vacant for weeks. I stepped onto the gravel and walked around the fence line. There, nestled inside, a birdhouse, nailed high to a pine tree, was a hidden camera still powered, still recording. Marcus confirmed it the next day. This wasn't just Karen's, he said. This was a whole setup. Networked devices, passive motion triggers. There are at least 5 more locations around the lake based on signal triangulation. Even with Karen gone, the system she built had lived on. Marcus worked with authorities and the board to dismantle the remaining cameras, but I made one final request. I asked to keep the original drone. They agreed. I mounted it in a glass display box and placed it in my lakefront living room, with a brass tag that reads, "This is what happens when you let power fly too high." Today, Rosefield Shores is quieter. Perfect. Places but people. Talk more now. Neighbors check in. the board is transparent. And if anyone starts pushing too hard, they get reminded of the woman who tried to kick a man off his own lake and ended up losing everything instead. Karen's court date is still approaching. Her attorney is reportedly angling for a plea deal, but public pressure may force a trial. And if that happens, you better believe I'll be there front row, because I didn't just fight for my dock or my peace. I fought for the right to not be ruled by someone else's delusion of control. I fought to remind people that no HOA rulebook overrides the truth, and that the lake, the land, the community we have, to protect it from those who forget they were never supposed to rule it, only serve it. If you've stuck with me through this wild story, thank you. And if you've ever been targeted, silenced, or threatened in your own neighborhood, don't stay quiet. Speak out. Stand firm. And if you want more unbelievable true stories just like this one, make sure to subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel. Because the next HOA Karen might already be watching, and you won't believe what she does next.